Again, my name is Bill Diehl. I'm with the Port Bureau. I'm going to talk about the port, and then I do a little thing called Port 101. It's going to be a little bit of that, and then a little bit about what the issues are with the port. So I'm going to go through it kind of quick, and then if we have time afterwards, I'll take some questions. So the question always is, when people come down, they say, what is the port? Okay? So when you look at this, I tell people, I've probably worked in 10 different ports around the country in my Coast Guard career. And when I got here, I looked at this and I said, what is the deal with this port, really? It's not really a port. Like in most of the senses where you go into a natural port, it's deep and wide and it makes a lot of sense. What this is really is a ditch dug across a 10-foot bay called Galveston Bay and then extended up through Buffalo Bayou. So basically, back about 100 years ago, the Estonians said, you know what, we need a port. We don't want to use Galveston anymore. And what we want to do is dig across Galveston Bay, up the Buffalo Bayou, and we're going to make a world-class port. And people said, no way. No way we're going to do this. And they had the Congressman Tom Ball leading the charge, and he goes up to D.C. and he brings down a delegation. They're coming down here, and of course, Buffalo Bayou at the time is this little rinky-dink thing, and it's not, and there's no way you can envision a port, a world-class port. So what happens? We get rain just like we had today. So feel blessed when we get this monsoon, because that's how the port came to birth. When they arrived here, this thing was swollen over the banks. It looked huge, and they could visualize a world-class port, even though it was only deep on the sides. You're like, I can see it now. So I'm happy that it's raining, because that means we're going to have a good port. But anyways, so that's what the port, that's how they came about. And then they said, we'll pay half of it, and we went forward with digging the ditch. I tell you that because most people don't understand. It's like, well, why does it cost so much to have a port here in Houston? Because we got to keep digging out our ditch. Because every time it rains, that stuff comes down, falls in our ditch. Okay? And we know it takes $50 million a year to dig out the ditch. Okay? And people say, that's crazy. We don't want to spend that amount. Well, if you looked at the port's figures from yesterday, the thing generates $2 billion a day in business. Now, I'm from Buffalo, and we have snow. And if we up in Buffalo said, you know what, we're tired of paying for snow removal, so let's not do any business for 4 months. That's just crazy. The price of doing business on our channel is to dig the dirt out. We know it costs $50 million, but the thing generates $2 billion a day. That's a pretty good return, okay? So if you understand the dynamics of our port, you can kind of get to where we're going, okay? So, what is the port? The other thing, when I got here, I looked around and I said, this thing is massive. What is this thing? It's not really a port in the natural sense that I've been familiar with ports, because most ports are conveyor belts. The box comes in, it goes on a truck and a train and goes somewhere. It's not going to that location. But really, you got to reframe your mind. This port is really the largest manufacturing center in the U.S. and maybe in the world. And when you think of our port as the largest manufacturing center in the U.S., you can understand why it's important to get the global markets through our waterways. But the primary thing is keeping this manufacturing center working. So the port is, okay, the box comes in, it goes to truck and train, it goes somewhere, right? Well, what happens here is oil comes in, it's refined, it goes to the chemical companies, they split the carbons, the thing spins around for a couple months, and all of a sudden it comes out as toluene. And then we decide, does it go to a domestic market, we put it in a barge, or if it goes to a global market, we put it in a ship, and away it goes. It's beautiful. And all these companies are clustered here because you're like, hey, I need sulfuric acid. Oh, it's 2 pipelines away, or it's a rail car away, or whatever. And we can manufacture all this that the rest of the country doesn't want in their backyard. But when it's done, you got to get it to market. And to get it to market, the most efficient way is by water. Okay? So when you look at this is there's 274 plants in the port, 190 companies in the port. So when they ask me, what is the port? I go, well, it's really just a manufacturing center. The secondary part is the ship channel. The ship channel is just a highway to get you out, to market. So I ask again, what is the port? Now, when I look at this thing, right, the thing I hear from when I travel around the country and stuff and talk to other people, they're like, oh, you don't want to go to the Port of Houston, it's congested. They're too busy. And I'm like, really? I'm like, have you ever been there? Have you ever seen what we do? And they're like, no, look at that picture. That's a lot of ships. There's too much traffic here. You don't want to you're going to be in a traffic jam if you go down to Houston, into the port. And I say, well, let's measure congestion in my mind, okay? So let's say we close the ship channel for a day, okay? Fog, something like that, okay? We move 55 ships a day on the Houston Ship Channel. That's the average, 350 barges a day, okay? So we close it down for a day. The next day, we'll move 90-some ships in that day. So that tells me tomorrow, I have enough pilots, tugs, line handlers, docks, tanks, terminals, everything I need to move almost double the volume tomorrow, already on the shelf. And I know I can move it tomorrow. So that channel is not congested. That's not the issue. We can move the stuff with what we have here. I'll get to what the issue is later, which is the widening of the main bay reach. But when you look at this and someone tells you the ship channel is congested, this is the most efficient ship channel in the nation. And I'll get to that also later. But what I want to point to you is one of the key things that people don't understand about port, it's not just docks and ships. I already said it was the manufacturing center, but when you look at these tanks here, look at those things. Tanks are critical to a port. So I wake up every Sunday and I read the Houston Chronicle, and it talks about Corpus Christi. And it starts my day bad. I'm like, why am I reading about the port of Corpus Christi? They're like the next, major port in the world. And I go, they are going to participate in what's going on to the west of us in the Permian Basin like we all are, but no more than we are, or probably a lot less than we are, and I'll explain it to you. So see these tanks here? If I count the number of tanks that they have down in Corpus, it's about 20 million barrels of storage. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500 million barrels. And you say, why is that important? Because when I punch a hole in the Permian and I start pumping that stuff to the coast, and all of a sudden I get to the coast and there's someone hanging from the bridge and you can't come into the port, right? Then what happens is I put it in a tank. Now, if I'm hanging from the bridge down in Corpus and you can't get into Corpus Bay, what happens? You got to yell back to the Permian to shut the well in because you can't pump it into a tank. Tanks are capacitors in our system. So in a supply chain, you want to move, and then all of a sudden you got to have your plan B. Our plan B is 3 to 4 days of tank storage here. So if it shows up here and the ship's not at the dock, we say, dump it in the tank, it'll be up tomorrow. Or we can reroute it out of here into the Golden Triangle area or into one of the refineries or one of the plants here. It can be sold off, plan B, plan C, things like that. If you go into a different port, your options are limited. Yes, we're going to see a lot of oil coming towards the coast. And I say all the ports in the Gulf Coast, well, from, Corpus around to probably Lake Charles, are all going to benefit from this. We're all going to see benefits from it. Okay, they're going to see some because they're closer to it, but they're going to see oil. We're going to see LPG, and Vincent DiCosimo will follow me, and he'll talk more about what the market's going to be. But I want you to remember these tanks because people don't realize that the pipes, tanks, and all that are very relevant to a supply chain because it gives us capacity. When the ship channel is closed, we can go to plan B. And that tank capacity of having 500 million barrels in this port versus 2 million for a different port is key. It's one of the things that makes us successful. And that's investments that pay dividends. So I'm going to talk about a couple things. This is the Panama Canal. I think you got to understand what the Panama Canal is, and I love this picture because I took it when I was working at the Panama Canal back in the mid 2005-ish time frame, okay? So this is a Panamax container ship, okay? And how do I know? Because you can count the containers across the back, and it measures, there's 13 of them. The containers are just like Legos to me, right? So if I was to tell you how container system works and why it's so effective for us, okay? All of a sudden, we decided, like, you know what's the quickest way to move cargo? We put it in little dimensional boxes, and then we put it on top of the ship. And then the ship pulls in, like this table here, right? And the big crane comes down, and it grabs the Legos, puts them on the trucks or trains or whatever, or on the dock, and then it grabs what it needs and puts it on here, and we turn that ship around in 20 hours, okay? But we want them all on top. Well, we can stack them only about 6 high before they start crushing each other, right? So we got to go wide. Plus, we can't see once you start like, whoa, they're so high, like, where are we going, right? Well, that's what containers are, but we want them all up high. So in the container business, as in most business, better, faster, cheaper is what we want. So what is better? Better is bigger. So if I can take this container ship, and it's this one here, a little less than 5,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent. A box, normal box is 40, what you see on the highway. So the smaller ones are 20-foot, right? So these are, that's how we measure container ships. Well, I want, I'm going to say this ship, and I go, you know what? I can take this ship, and I can make it twice as big, and I got the same crew on board. I got a little more fuel, a little more steel, but I'm going to make a lot more money, and I can charge less per box. So you're happy as a customer, I'm happy as a ship owner, let's do it. So I go cut steel and I get a bigger ship. Well, the deal with it is, if I want a bigger container ship, you got to think about naval architecture, okay? So I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about naval architecture. When you go home, you'll be like, oh, I could go to sea right now. So basically, if I stand up in a canoe, what happens? I go swimming. I fall in, I go swimming. That's what happens. If I stand up in a bass boat, what happens? I go fishing, right? So you say, okay, well, how does that work? Well, the width of the ship here is cubed in your stability calculations. So if I go from a 1-foot canoe to a 2-foot canoe, I have 8 times the stability, 2 times 2 times 2. You follow? Okay? So I want all this weight on top of my ship. I don't want to open the hatches and put them down in there because that's tough for my cranes and my cables to get down. So I want all my weight up high. I want to move this table around the world and pull it into a dock and then lower my cranes and get my Legos and go, right? So I want everything up high, so I need a wider ship. So you see container ships going, woo, because they need the stability. They don't necessarily want to get longer. They necessarily need to get wider. Why they need to get longer is they want to be faster. My son swam in high school, and he's a big kid. You look at me, and he's 6'2". I kind of have to ask some questions of the wife, but I tell him when he was swimming, I said, you got to get longer off the wall. You got to stretch out. You'll be faster. And I said, this is how it works. If I take the same ship and I cut a hole in it, and I put a section in, 30 yards, the same engine plant and a longer ship, it's a faster ship. So when I go wider, I still need to get there in time, right? So I go a little bit longer. But I really want to go wider. So this is what the Panama Canal was all about. We were down in the Panama, we're looking at these ships coming through. I'm on the ship behind. I took this picture, and I'm thinking, what a great view, right? These things are busting out. But they can only go 106 feet wide because that thing's 110 feet wide. So they said, the Panamanians said, you know what, we better get a bigger canal. Otherwise, we're going to go out of business. Because container guys were not asking us whether we were going to, be okay with them going to 8,000 to 14,000 TEU ships. So Panama, this little country of, probably 13 billion GDP a year, decides to fork over $6 billion a year to build a new lane, a new set of locks here. And so you see it over here. These are the old ones, and they build the new set. And if you understand the Panama Canal, basically you go in these locks and it raises you up 58 feet, and then you get in a lake, and then you sail across Panama, which they flooded, and then you come down the other side on the same thing, okay? Pretty basic, okay? The problem is, every time I put a ship through Panama, I flush 52 million gallons of fresh water to sea. So we're sitting there thinking, okay, every time we knew we got 12,000 flushes a year over here in these lanes, right? So we're like, okay, what if we build a new lane that's 4 times the size? Well, we only have so that instead of 12,000 flushes, if we go over here, we're only going to have, because it's 4 times the water, we're going to have 3,000 flushes, and we're not going to have any ships going through over here. You following what I'm talking about? So at some point, they build these recycle things here, that recirculate the water so that it still only uses 52 million gallons of transit. So all these, now the 3 lanes are all using 52 million gallons per flush. You still only have 12,000 flushes or transits. So now you want bigger, not more. You follow? Because I'm only going to get so many times to go through the canal in a year because God only gives you so much rain. You don't believe that today, but it's kind of true. Okay? And like in November, we would get an email at the canal. It would be in Spanish, and it would take me about 5 minutes to translate it, but I would get there, and they would say, hey, we reached our quota for the year. And we'd all go, yay, we're going to be in business for a year because the reservoirs would be filled up enough that we could get our 12,000 transits the next year. Okay? So this is what the industry wants. Not bigger container ships, but more container ships, okay? So I'll come back to that later, which is going to happen to us. The second thing, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because Vincent DiCosimo is going to come up, follow me, and tell you what's going on. But I want to just show you this, that you look at this as natural gas, oil, and natural gas liquids, okay? And this is all moving towards the coast, and we're going to see more of it. That's what you're seeing in this thing here. So my wife was asking me, like, I don't really understand it, and I want to have a conversation with her. So I said, well, it's really great. See, this fracking thing, okay, we go out and we blow up the ground. And she's like, I'm not getting it. And I said, well, what happened was they went way down, and they made an explosion with sand and stuff, and they made these little holes. And the methane, which is 1 carbon molecule and 4 hydrogen molecules, this little teeny thing comes through the crack, right, and falls out into the well. And like, yay, I'm free. And it comes up, and we got gas, okay? So then they were like, you know what, if we a little bit more charge, we can make them a little bit wider, and then we get the next C2, C3, C4 molecules, these, propane, butane, ethane start coming out, okay? Very basic chemistry, okay? Well, what is oil? Oil's like this 20 carbon thing, this big glob in there, right? It's 20, and it's got sulfur and other things attached to it, right? So if we want to get to oil, well, I'm a well driller, and I'm thinking I can make an explosion and make it a little bit bigger. I can not only get methane, but I can get ethane, propane, butane, and oil from the same well. So I go, and all of a sudden I'm happy, right? Because now I'm selling oil, I'm selling ethane, I'm selling methane, and I'm ready to go, right? So that's what this shows you, okay? And I'm going to tell you why that's an issue for us. But first I'm going to talk about the market, okay? I put this market up, this thing up about plastic resins going out. But that's not really what I want to talk about today. What I want to show you here is I did this once, and Ambassador Sosa was in the audience. He said, Bill, you got it all wrong. And I said, probably. And he said, you don't have Panama in the middle of the earth. And I said, well, I understand Panama is important to you. You were the ambassador, but why would I put Panama in the middle here? He goes, because then it doesn't look like you're going all the way across the world to get to Asian markets. This is all about Asian markets for the most part. But if I come down through the Panama Canal, I only have to come out here. It's a different optics. I'm not going all the way over there. I'm just coming over here, and I'm in Asia. And a lot of this growth is going to Asia. So if we understand Asia, and we understand that we're going through the canal to get there, we can understand how our market's going to go. So I always tell people, like, if you follow cargo, you'll know where we're going. Just make your bet aligned about where you see the cargo needs to go. Well, the cargo needs to come down, and it needs to get over to Asia because that's where the market's growing, okay? So this is what you see. You see, we blow the hole, out comes oil, we're going to refine the products, and all this stuff starts to move, okay? And we see this all coming towards the port. And we know, and Vincent's going to talk about how all this thing is going to develop out, but we know when it starts coming towards the coast, we got to get rid of it because we don't need it anymore. We don't need a lot of this extra stuff. We're going to process the ethane into polyethylene, and we're going to make plastic pellets, but we're going to ship it out to Asian markets, okay? So we're going to see these ships, we're going to see this start to come. Now, the trick to this, though, and I explained this to my wife, I go, the thing that we got to worry about is once we blow that hole out here in the Permian, and up comes oil, ethane, propane, butane, methane, but right, coming this way, right? It's like 3 conveyor belts, 3 separate conveyor belts that are coming to the coast. Like I Love Lucy, where the chocolate's moving across, and she's like, at some point it's overwhelming her, and she's shoving it in her blouse, and things moving. Well, we got 3 of those headed our way. So if we send all the oil to Corpus, we still got to send LPG out of here. Because if we don't take the LPG, they can't get to the oil. All 3 things got to move. And if it's only going to move oil, you can't just say, well, lock the other stuff down there. Once we blow the hole, let's just take the oil. No, you got to take the methane, the propane, butane, you got to take everything that comes out, and you got to go, and then you start going this way, and then you go, well, what are we going to do with it? I don't know, throw it in some tanks, let's get it out of here, And that's what we're seeing. All this stuff's moving, and we got to say, we got to get more ships in here. We got to move this stuff out. We got to get more tanks. We got to build this thing to handle what they're doing out in the Permian Basin. And this is what we see, a growth of ship traffic, okay? But I already told you that we can do more ships. We're doing 55 a day. We can do 90 tomorrow. If we get some more pilots, some more tugs, some more line handlers, we could probably do more. So you go, okay, well, what's the issue? The issue is the mid-bay. And you heard about this yesterday and the widen the channel and stuff like that. Well, I'm going to cut right to it and tell you about it. So this is the part that's causing us problems. And basically the Army Corps said, $10 million study, 4 years. They came back and they said, you know what, we're going to widen this blue part here to 650, and we're going to leave the rest of the main bay channel at 530 feet wide. And we're like, are you crazy? That's ridiculous. We need to move more ships. And they're like, the math doesn't add up to us. It doesn't work for us because their calculations are based on the depth of the channel. So a foot deeper calculates into X more cargo. Well, our ships are getting wider because the container ships are getting wider, not so much deeper. They're getting wider is what we're seeing, and they're getting a bit longer, and our LPG ships are getting longer. And they got to pass in this area. So you say, okay, I'm still having trouble following you. So here's what happens in our ship channel. Nowhere else do they do this in the United States. We call it the Texas chicken, okay? The pilots have perfected it here, and it really is, phenomenal, really. So if you and I were coming down this little narrow road, okay, in our neighborhood, in my car, in your car, or whatever, and I see you, I would slow down and I would just kind of squeak by you, right, in this narrow lane. Well, it doesn't work that way because we're all naval architects, right? What happens is when I come through in my big ship, I'm leaving a big hole back here because I've sucked all the water out because I put my ship in there, right? So your natural tendency is to fall into my hole. So I'm actually going to suck you into my ship as I go by you. So what you have to do is do it a different way. You have to say, okay, you line up, you come this way, I come this way. We're going to go right at each other. When we're about a half mile apart, I'm going to give 10 degrees starboard rudder, you're going to give 10 degrees starboard rudder, and our bow waves here are going to give us that cushion to push us off. And I will go out towards the edge of the channel. When I get out to the edge of the channel will buffer me a little bit, and then I'll come in right behind you. So it's this beautiful like leapfrog thing that they're doing. And if you were in a helicopter over the ship channel, you would watch them go, they go right at each other, and then they just go right around each other. It's the Texas chicken. Our Houston pilots are fantastic. No one else does it. No one talks about it, and you can see here the little diagram how it works. Well, the problem is when you get to about 1,100 square feet, you can't get back in on the Texas chicken because you can't get far enough out. So when I start to go out, I do the bow wave and I go out, but I can't get all the way out here, and I'm still way back here, and I'm wider because I'm a wider ship, and all of a sudden I don't have as much room, and I can't get back in. So at some point, the pilots say, at 1,100 feet, we can't do this. We can't do this maneuver safely anymore without crashing into each other. So we need a wider channel. So if we were Norfolk, they have the same size container ships we have. Their channel is 1,400 feet wide. We're 530. And the Army Corps says, we'll go to 650 for you. We're like, are you crazy? We need to be 700 because we need to get back into doing the Texas chicken with these bigger ships so we can move our 55 to 100 ships that are coming our way. So they're like, I don't know. Maybe you guys pay for it. We're like, how much is it going to cost? They go, it's going to cost you $1 billion to crow across that bay, to dig out across that bay to 700. We're like, okay, so $1 billion to dig this thing out, which would keep our port the most efficient in the nation that does $2 billion a day in business. Yes. And we have to pay for it. Yes. Okay. That's the issue that we're looking at as an industry. If you haven't gotten that, the cliff notes, that's what we're going to be doing. We need to get the Corps to say, we're going to dig at the 700. We need to get Congress to say, you're good to go to 700. And then they're going to turn around and say, where's your checkbook? And we're going to have to come up with $1 billion to get there. Or we can wait 15 years and go out of business because they're not going to wait for us to get our act together. Now, we're looking at $1 billion, and I just told you Panama realized this when I was down there in 2005. We said, if we don't expand, we don't become relevant anymore as a major route. And so here's a little country with $13 billion in GDP that says, we're going to spend about half our GDP to widen and build a new canal, otherwise we go out of business. And up in the U.S., we're like, I'm sorry, $1 billion is just a little too much. And our industry's saying, get out of the way. We're going to have to figure out a way to pay this. But we need the congressional people to say, yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead and do it. Write your own check, but get out of the way. So it goes all the way back to the Tomball day where we're like, hey, we're going to widen this channel because we see business coming our way. We see these conveyor belts heading our way. We need to process this. We need to keep ourselves relevant, and we need to do it. And we're like, if we got to pay, we got to pay. So that's the issue with the widening the channel, if you've been following it over the last couple days during the speakers. So I got a few more minutes so meanwhile, I'm going to shift gears now, okay? So you say, okay, that's great. You need a wider ship channel. Well, this is going to take some time to play out. Meanwhile, while we're doing that, we're still trying to make the ship channel efficient. So the more efficient we make it, the more we can still move ships with what we have. So we're going to look at how do we do that. And this is the system that we use at the Port Bureau, which is, the way I describe this is, when I go to Bush Airport and I'm going to fly to Boston, I look up at the flat screen and I say, oh, Boston B4 at 11 o'clock, and I go there. That flat screen at the airport self-organizes at Bush probably 100,000 people a day. It's the transfer or the transparency of information will get everyone on the same page. So not only the passengers know where to go, but the fuel truck and the food truck and the luggage people, and everyone knows what's going to happen, and they get in sync for the airport, and the airport becomes more efficient. Well, we took that model, and we went to the pilots, and we said, hey, you tell us when you're going to move it. We're going to let everyone else know. So when you come around the corner, the tug is there, the line handler's there, the cargo surveyor's there, and we're not wasting time, and our assets are being deployed. We're one of the few ports that use a system like this because we move so many ships. Because another port maybe move 10 ships a day, it's not as relevant as it is for us. But to stay in our position where we are, where we're moving twice the number of ships that any other port really is using in the United States, we have to use technology. And this is what we're doing. So we're like, okay, we're looking at a ship channel that is growing. We need to not only widen it, but we need to make it more efficient. So the next step in what we're working on right now is this system here, which we call Pronto. So we went over to Rotterdam and we said, what are you doing, with your ship management? And they have a system, and they said, well, we sort of like what you guys are doing. And we sort of looked at this model, and we said, okay, if I go to a plant, the plant manager is all about efficiency for his plant, okay? He's like, the plant is great, and he tells everyone, we need 2% more efficiency tomorrow, right? And he has the staff meeting and gets everyone in there, 2 more by the end of the year, and they write it on the chalkboard, and everyone tries to figure out 2%. And then they realize, like, hey, if all of industry works together, you know what? We can get 5% efficiency without as much lift. So then they started to work together. Okay, so that's kind of what we did in the port. We were like, if every terminal was efficient, that's great. But in order to get 5% more efficient, all the terminals need to work together on the ship channel and share information so we know what's going to happen, okay? So we're like, okay. And then Rotterdam said, so if that works at the plant, leveraging up to the port, why doesn't it work from the port to the global market? So when I leave Rotterdam and I'm coming to Houston and I sail out the gates of Rotterdam and I'm on my way, I know when I get to the dock here in Houston, to the facility here, that dock's available. If it's not available, I can slow my speed and save fuel. Or I may have to speed up a little bit to make the 2-hour window that I may have missed. But I know with this transparency information what is going to happen. And what industry wants more than better, faster, cheaper is predictability. If I know what's going to happen, then I'll place my money. If I know, okay, I can do this, I can make 6% return, and I know I can make it, that's great. Otherwise, you say, well, you might be able to make 8% or you might be able to make 2%. Well, I don't want that part of the business. I want a business that I know is going to deliver. And so it comes with information. So the folks in Rotterdam have basically are doing a demo with us here. We're going to do it for the next 6 months, probably a year, before we really understand the KPIs and whether this gives us the dividends we want. But basically, we're going to take all the information from the terminals and match it up with the previous system, which you saw. We already know all the ships and when they're going to move and how they're going to move, but we don't know whether the terminal is synced up with that. So the terminal may be thinking the Bao Santos is coming tomorrow, but if we look at the ship thing, we know the Bao Santos is not going there. Or 2 terminals may be thinking the Bao Santos is coming tomorrow, when really it's only going to go to 1. We just need to get to the transparency information. They have a system called Pronto. We're using that. And that's really my 2 messages. 1, understand the dynamics of the Texas chicken and why we got to have a wider channel. And second, we're not going to wait until that actually comes to bear. We're going to work on efficiency between now and then also. Those are my 2 messages for you. And I'll conclude. I got 6 minutes. I don't know if I'm supposed to take questions or move on. So we're good? Okay. I'll be around afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you.